Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start with a story. A few years ago, I stood backstage moments before delivering what I believed was the most important talk of my life. And right there, in the quiet shadows, that little voice showed up, the one that says, "Who do you think you are?" You know the voice, don't you? It's the one that questions if you're smart enough, talented enough, or worthy enough. It's the voice that points to every flaw and holds up every failure like a trophy. And in that moment, I had two choices. I could let that voice decide who I was, or I could remind myself of who I had already decided to be. I chose belief. And today, I want to talk about that choice, the choice to believe in ourselves even when the world doesn't. Because here's the truth, self-belief doesn't just magically appear when we need it most. It's not like flipping a switch or wishing on a star. It's something we build brick by brick through every choice we make and every story we tell ourselves about who we are. It's the foundation beneath our feet. And sometimes we don't even realize how much of that foundation was built for us by our families, our culture, or the voices we grew up hearing. I want you to think about your own foundation for a moment. When you were a kid, what words did you hear about yourself? Were you called creative, stubborn, bossy, dreamy, too much, not enough? Now, I want you to imagine those words as stones. Each one, whether it was spoken with love or criticism, added to the foundation you're standing on today. Some of those stones are solid and strong, and they remind you that you are capable and worthy. But others are cracked. Others tell you to shrink, to play small, to avoid risk, because failing might mean you're not lovable. And if we don't take the time to look at our foundation, to examine it and ask ourselves, is this true? Is this serving me? Then we keep building our lives on someone else's blueprint. We keep letting those cracks determine how far we're willing to go and how high we're willing to climb. I learned this the hard way. I remember one time years ago when I had the chance to take on a project that scared me. It was big, it was public, and it had the potential to change my career. But before I even opened my mouth to say yes, I felt it, that old voice again, "You're not ready. Someone else could do it better." And I almost said no. Almost. But something inside me, the part that had been slowly laying down new bricks and rebuilding my foundation, said, "Try anyway." So I did, and it wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was brave. It was the first time I realized that belief doesn't come from certainty, it comes from showing up even when you're not sure. And maybe that's the most important thing I can tell you today. Self-belief isn't about feeling fearless. It's about deciding to trust yourself even when you're scared. It's about building a foundation strong enough to hold you when the doubts come, and they will come. But here's the thing, doubt doesn't mean you're not ready. It doesn't mean you're not enough. It just means you're human. And self-belief, that's what reminds you that being human is more than enough. So I want to ask you, what's one belief about yourself that's been holding you back? What's one story you've been carrying that's keeping you small? Because here's the truth, you don't have to keep it. You don't have to keep that cracked stone in your foundation. You get to choose. And every time you choose to believe in yourself, even if it's just for a moment, you're laying down a new brick. You're building something solid and unshakable. And before you know it, you'll be standing on a foundation that reminds you every single day exactly who you are, strong, brave, and more than enough. A few years ago, I was working with a woman who wanted to change careers. She sat across from me, shoulders hunched, hands fidgeting with the edge of her notebook, and said, "I can't do this. I'm not brave like other people." I remember the way she said it, softly, almost apologetically, as if her fear made her less than. But what struck me most wasn't her words. It was the weight she carried behind them, the years of believing that bravery was something other people had, that confidence was a birthright she had somehow missed out on. I asked her a simple question that day. I said, "Who told you that story?" At first, she looked confused, and I get it, because most of us don't think about the beliefs we carry as stories. We think of them as facts, as truth carved into stone. But the truth is that so much of what we believe about ourselves was never really ours to begin with. Maybe it was the teacher who told you that you weren't a leader, or the parent who worried out loud that you'd never amount to much, or the friend who made an offhand comment about how you were too sensitive, too loud, too ambitious. And somewhere along the way, those words stopped being opinions and started being the lens you saw yourself through. We all have these stories about who we are, what we're capable of, and what we deserve. And the hardest part, most of us don't even realize we're carrying them. I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine if you walked into a library and every book on the shelves was a story someone else had written about you. Some of them might be beautiful stories about your kindness, your resilience, your creativity, but others might be harsh, full of judgments and limits that have nothing to do with who you really are. Now, imagine carrying those books with you day after day, year after year, until they're so heavy that you can't move forward without feeling their weight. That's what happens when we internalize the wrong stories. And the truth is, we're all carrying a few heavy books we never asked for. But here's the most powerful thing we can realize: those stories can be rewritten. I remember asking that woman to tell me about a time when she had been brave. At first, she shook her head. She couldn't think of one. But when I pressed her, when I asked about moments in her life when she had taken risks, spoken up, or stood her ground, her face softened. She told me about moving to a new city alone, about asking for help when it felt impossible, about raising her kids without a safety net. And as she talked, I watched something shift. I watched her realize that the story she had been telling herself that she wasn't brave wasn't true at all. What was true was that she had been brave in 100 different ways. But because those moments didn't look like the kind of bravery we see in movies or read about in books, she hadn't recognized them for what they were. And that's what we do, isn't it? We downplay our own courage. We convince ourselves that we're not strong because we don't feel strong all the time. We tell ourselves we're not brave because we still feel scared. But courage doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you keep going even when you are. And that's the story we need to start telling ourselves, the one that honors the strength we've already shown, the challenges we've already faced, and the resilience we've already built. Because self-belief isn't just about imagining a future where we're strong and fearless. It's about recognizing the evidence that's already there right now, in our lived experience that proves we're capable. So I want to invite you to think about the stories you've been carrying. Which ones feel heavy? Which ones feel small? And which ones, if you really stop to examine them, might not even be true? I want you to imagine pulling one of those stories off the shelf, holding it in your hands, and asking yourself, does this still serve me? And if the answer is no, I want you to imagine setting it down and picking up a blank page instead, a new story. One that says I am brave, one that says I can do hard things, one that says I am enough. Because the most powerful thing we can do isn't to erase our old stories, it's to rewrite them. To take what we've learned, what we've survived, and what we've overcome and turn it into a story that reminds us not just of who we are, but of who we're becoming. Let's talk about vulnerability. We're taught to hide it, to mask it with perfection, performance, or pretending. From the time we're young, we learn to armor up. We learn to keep our fears and insecurities tucked away because the world has this way of making us feel like vulnerability is a liability, like it's something to be ashamed of. But here's the truth I've come to understand: vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is courage in its rawest, most unfiltered form. Think about it, every brave decision you've ever made, every risk you've ever taken, started with vulnerability. It started with the willingness to stand in uncertainty, to face the unknown, and to open yourself up to the possibility of failure. Vulnerability is showing up when there are no guarantees, when the outcome is out of your control, and saying, I'm here anyway. I remember one moment in particular when this truth hit me square in the chest. I was about to share something deeply personal with a group of people, something that made me feel exposed, like I was standing in the middle of a crowded room without any armor. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and that voice, the one that loves to remind us of our imperfections, was whispering in my ear, what if they judge you? What if this is too much? What if you regret this? And I almost didn't do it. I almost let fear win. But then I thought about all the times I had seen someone else share their story, their real, messy, complicated, imperfect story, and how it made me feel less alone, how it cracked something open inside me and made me feel braver just by witnessing their courage. And in that moment, I realized something important: vulnerability isn't just about having the courage to share your truth. It's about giving other people permission to do the same. It's about creating space where others can lay down their armor too. So I took a breath, stepped forward, and I shared. And you know what happened? People leaned in. Not away, and because the truth is, we are all drawn to what's real. We are all hungry for connection. And the only way to truly connect is to be seen, fully seen. And here's the thing. Self-belief doesn't mean you'll never feel that fear again. It doesn't mean you'll never doubt yourself or question whether you're enough. It just means you'll keep showing up even when you do. Because courage isn't a feeling, it's a decision. It's a choice we make every single time we lean into vulnerability instead of running away from it. I think so many of us are waiting to feel ready before we take the leap. We're waiting until we feel confident enough, strong enough, certain enough. But what if I told you that readiness is a myth? That confidence isn't something you need before you act, it's something you build by acting. That's what vulnerability teaches us. It teaches us that showing up, especially when we're scared, is the birthplace of confidence, not the other way around. It's the place where growth happens. And I know this is hard because vulnerability means opening ourselves up to the possibility of rejection, criticism, and failure. It means risking the very things we're most afraid of, but it also means opening ourselves up to connection, growth, and transformation. It means risking failure and risking greatness. Because here's the truth: if you avoid vulnerability, you're not just avoiding pain, you're also avoiding joy. You're avoiding the kind of experiences that make you feel alive, the moments that remind you what it means to be human. So the question isn't whether vulnerability is scary. It is. The question is whether it's worth it. And the answer, every single time. I think about the woman who shared her story with me, how she had spent so many years believing that her fears disqualified her from being brave. But the moment she let herself be seen, the moment she chose to lean into her vulnerability, instead of hiding from it, everything changed. And that's what I want for all of us: to stop waiting for the fear to go away, to stop waiting until we feel strong enough, and to start showing up exactly as we are. Messy, imperfect, brave. Because the truth is, vulnerability isn't what holds us back, it's what propels us forward. It's what allows us to grow into the people we were always meant to be. And it's what reminds us that self-belief doesn't come from having all the answers, it comes from having the courage to ask the questions, take the risks, and stand in the discomfort of the unknown. So if you're waiting for the fear to disappear before you show up, let me save you some time, it won't. But the good news is, you don't need it to. You just need to take the first step, to let yourself be seen, and to trust that showing up even when you're scared is what builds the kind of belief that no one can take away. Because at the end of the day, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing we'll ever do. And it's the key to unlocking the kind of self-belief that doesn't just help us survive, but allows us to thrive. I failed more times than I can count. And I don't mean the kind of failures that you can laugh about later. I mean the kind that feel like they split you open, the ones that knock the wind out of you and leave you questioning whether you'll ever be able to stand back up. The kind that feel final. I remember one particular failure that hit me hard. It was a project I had poured months into, late nights, early mornings, and everything I had to give. I believed in it. I believed in myself. And then it flopped. Not quietly. Not in a way that allowed me to brush it off and pretend it never happened. It failed in a way that felt public, personal, and permanent. I remember sitting in my car afterwards, staring out the windshield, completely numb. The questions started almost immediately. What was I thinking? Who did I think I was? Maybe they were right, maybe I wasn't cut out for this. And that's the thing about failure. It doesn't just hurt, it echoes. It finds its way into your thoughts and convinces you that you were foolish for trying in the first place. But as I sat there in my car, surrounded by the mess of my disappointment, I realized I had a choice. I could let this failure define me, or I could let it teach me. I could let it keep me down, or I could let it show me what I was made of. And let me tell you, that moment, the moment you decide to get back up when everything in you is screaming to stay down, is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Because when we fail, the temptation isn't just to quit, it's to hide. It's to make ourselves smaller, to avoid risks, and to convince ourselves that playing it safe is the smarter option. But here's what I've learned: failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. It's the testing ground. It's the fire that burns away the lies we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. And it's in that fire and the ashes of what didn't work that we find out what we're really made of. Think about it. Every person you admire, every author, athlete, artist, or an entrepreneur, they didn't get to where they are without failure. They didn't succeed because they avoided it. They succeeded because they faced it. They walked through it. They let it shape them without letting it stop them. We love to tell stories about people who rise, but what we often forget is that the rise only happens because of the fall. The fall is where we learn. It's where we grow. It's where we figure out what we really want and how much we're willing to fight for it. I think about one woman I worked with who had poured everything into starting her own business. And when it didn't take off the way she hoped, she called me and said, "I failed." She said it like it was final, like it was the end of her story. But as we talked, I started to see something she couldn't yet see for herself. I saw the courage it took to even try. I saw the lessons she had learned, the connections she had made, and the experience she had gained. And I saw the determination in her voice when she said, "I don't want to give up." And that's what failure does if we let it. It clarifies. It strips away the noise and the excuses, and it asks us the hard questions. How much do you really want this? Are you willing to keep going, even now? The truth is, no one escapes failure. No one gets to build a life of meaning and purpose without getting knocked down along the way. But the people who make it, the people who turn failure into fuel, are the ones who choose to see it not as proof that they're not enough, but as evidence that they're in the arena, that they're trying, that they're showing up. I think we spend so much of our lives trying to avoid failure that we forget the simple truth. If you're failing, it means you're doing something. It means you're reaching, growing, risking. And isn't that the whole point? Failure isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of, because it means you had the courage to take the leap when so many people chose to stay on the sidelines. But here's the part we often miss. Getting back up doesn't mean pretending the fall didn't hurt. It doesn't mean brushing it off and acting like it didn't matter. Getting back up means feeling every bit of the pain, the embarrassment, and the disappointment, and choosing to rise anyway. It means looking at the pieces and deciding what you can learn. It means letting the cracks remind you that you are not fragile, you are human. And humans are built to repair, to rebuild, and to rise. I think about that moment in my car after my own failure, and I realize now that what I thought was an ending was actually a beginning. It was the start of a deeper belief in myself, a belief that wasn't built on perfection or success, but on resilience. Because self-belief isn't about convincing yourself you'll never fall. It's about trusting yourself to rise again and again. It's about knowing that the fall doesn't define you, what you do next does. So when failure comes and don't run from it, don't hide from it. Face it, feel it, and then get back up and use it. Use it to fuel your next step, your next try, your next leap. Because that's how belief is built, not in the moments when everything is easy, but in the moments when everything feels hard and you choose to keep going anyway. And in those moments, you'll see failure isn't the end of the road. It's just the bend that points you in a new direction. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. The wind is strong, tugging at your clothes, and your heart is pounding so loud you can feel it in your throat. Below you, the drop is steep, and the ground looks impossibly far away. Everything in your body is telling you to back up, to step away, to stay safe. But there's another voice, a quieter one. It's not shouting, it's not demanding, it's whispering. It's saying, "What if you can fly?" That voice, that's self-belief. And more often than not, it's drowned out by the noise of fear and doubt. But here's what I've learned: the difference between the people who take the leap and the people who don't isn't the absence of fear. It's the volume they give to that small, quiet voice. And here's the thing: self-belief isn't something we're born with. It's something we build. It's something we strengthen every single time we trust ourselves enough to take a step forward, even when we're scared. I remember working with someone who had spent years standing at the edge of her own cliff. She wanted to start something new, but every time she got close, she stepped back. She made excuses, told herself it wasn't the right time, convinced herself she wasn't ready. And each time she stepped back, the voice of doubt got louder and the voice of belief got quieter. So we started small. Instead of asking her to take the leap all at once, we focused on building tiny moments of trust, saying yes to small challenges, taking small risks, and proving to herself that she could handle it. And slowly, that voice of belief began to grow louder. Because here's the truth: self-belief doesn't just show up fully formed, it's built in layers. It's built in the moments when you push yourself to try something new, even when you feel unqualified. It's built when you speak up in a meeting, even when your voice shakes. It's built when you go after something you want, even when there's no guarantee you'll get it. And the more you show up, the more you risk. The more you practice trusting yourself, the stronger that belief becomes. It stops being a whisper and starts becoming a roar. But let me be clear: building self-belief doesn't mean you'll never doubt yourself again. It doesn't mean you'll never feel fear or insecurity. What it means is that those things won't stop you. They might slow you down. They might make you pause. But they won't stop you. Because self-belief isn't about eliminating fear. It's about learning to walk alongside it. It's about saying, "I see you, I feel you, but you don't get to drive this car." I think so often we wait until we feel confident to take action. But the truth is, confidence is the byproduct of action. It doesn't come first, it comes after. I think about the first time you tried something new, whether it was learning to ride a bike, starting a new job, or speaking in front of a crowd. You probably didn't feel confident at first. You probably felt awkward, unsteady, maybe even a little ridiculous. But you kept going. You kept showing up. And somewhere along the way, that awkwardness gave way to confidence, not because you waited for it, but because you built it. And that's what self-belief is. It's not waiting for certainty. It's building trust through action. It's proving to yourself over and over again that you can do hard things, that you can survive discomfort, that you can stand in the unknown and keep moving forward. And yes, sometimes that movement will feel small, so small that it doesn't seem like it's making a difference. But every small step matters. Every time you show up, every time you try again, every time you refuse to quit, you're adding another brick to your foundation. And eventually you'll look down and realize you've built something solid, something unshakable, something that will hold you up even when the winds come and the storms hit. Because self-belief isn't about being fearless. It's about being brave enough to keep going even when you're scared. And let's be honest, fear is always going to be there. Doubt is always going to whisper in your ear. But what self-belief does is give you the power to decide which voice you're going to listen to. It reminds you that the voice of fear doesn't know the whole story. It doesn't see what you're capable of. It doesn't see the strength that's already inside you. I think about the people who have told me they're afraid to fail, afraid to look foolish, afraid to take a risk. And I get it, I really do. But what I always tell them is this: fear is only dangerous if it stops you from moving. Because the truth is, we're always going to feel fear when we're standing on the edge of something new. But what matters isn't the fear itself, it's what we do with it. It's whether we let it paralyze us or push us forward. And self-belief, that's what pushes us forward. That's what allows us to take one shaky step after another until we realize we're not falling, we're flying. So if you're standing on the edge right now, if you're staring at something you want but you're terrified to go after it, I want you to hear this: you don't have to feel ready. You don't have to feel fearless. You just have to trust yourself enough to take one step. Because self-belief doesn't start with the leap, it starts with the decision to try. It starts with the willingness to bet on yourself, even when you're not sure how it's all going to turn out. And over time, as you keep showing up, as you keep taking those steps, you'll discover something powerful. You don't have to wait for someone else to believe in you. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for the fear to disappear. You already have everything you need. You already have the courage. You already have the strength. You already have the ability to fly. The only thing left to do is trust yourself enough to take the first step.